You'll just kind of disappear somewhere. The issue for us is going to be how strange our particular revolution is going to get or continue. If you follow Gerald, what's his name,
Salenti?
Salenti, yeah. If you follow his work, he's saying the second revolution, American Revolution, has already begun, and I agree with him that the revolutionary impulse is certainly manifesting. I would just say that it just sort of took a hiatus between the late 1700s and now, and that we still have business to finish, that we never really got the first one correct.
Right.
So we're going to have to revisit some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And the issue is, with so many people and so many diverse factions and, the disenfranchised, just how strange will it become? By that I also mean how violent. Because we're getting to a situation where, the disenfranchised meth addict and then urban environment has more in common with the disenfranchised middle class who've been kicked out of their houses and are now trying to find shelter under freeways than those middle class do with their supposed political leaders.
Mm-hmm.
So it's under such circumstances, and with the gap between haves and have-nots never having reached these proportions, it looks like this is all quite inevitable.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And one of the things about this New World Order is that, somebody mentioned something to me that hadn't crossed my mind. We're also, so many people are afraid that it's going to happen. He says, it's already happened.
Yes, it's a long, slow process.
Yeah.
And everybody wakes up to it at a different time, and they're either anticipatory or they gain insight that it's already occurring, and it's a question of shoving this. There was a great science fiction writer by the name of Isaac Asimov. He wrote a series of books in the 50s called the Foundation Trilogy.
Oh, I loved them.
Right. Within the Foundation Trilogy was this particular character, I think his name was like Harry Sheldon or something, and he had invented this psychosocial historical analysis.
Yes.
Okay, in his world, in the world in which Isaac Asimov postulated this character, stuck way out in the far reaches of a great galactic empire, they charted everything in the course of centuries. Yeah. And basically what they were doing at a fundamental level, our stuff has been compared to it rather favorably, and I kind of like that. But basically what they were doing was they were watching large social trends emerge, and they would plot this, of course, across thousands of planets and, of course, tons of billions of beings, and it would take, centuries to occur. What we're actually kind of doing is seeing at the moment that sort of a view of history emerge around us. If you take a little step back, you can see these larger trends develop that we're all part of, unfortunately, and that we all have to swim through. But they're emerging in a space that's staggeringly brief, and it's just rather a shock as to how it comes out. And now I take heed of all of the literature about the revolutionary period here in the U.S. and in the French Revolution especially, of the 1700s, late 1700s, because in both cases they say that, events were agonizingly slow to unfold until all of a sudden it was on and everybody was hip-deep in blood. And it just emerged and erupted in a magnificent chaos in a very short period of time once it reached this critical point. And I think we're getting close to that kind of stuff. Our data would suggest that some kind of arc or major point of unsettlement awaits us in the early part of 2010 that will tip us into a much more active version of revolution.
Interesting. And also there's, in 2010, there's mention of possible tidal overflowing. We know that the ice is melting in both places, on the top and bottom of the ball.
Yeah.
And, in fact, I had the strange feeling that one of those ice packs was cut with a laser, because there was a picture of it a while back, and it was
it's how square it, how rectangular, yes.
Yeah, and I thought, that's got to be a laser device from the sky. They have them. They have anything you can imagine.
Yeah, but I would presuppose that you needn't go that far to see this come out, because you're dealing with a crystalline structure anyway. And crystals have a tendency to fracture along the platonic solids, so rectilinear shapes are to be expected. And a level of precision, you don't find rectilinear shapes more precise than are made by nature in the form of crystals. So,
true, and they are perfect, supposedly. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've collected crystals and little bits and pieces of rock, and you can see just how precise they are.
Yeah, they really are.
Yeah.
Now, what about how do you think?
But before we move on, let's also note that the Australian government recently has put out this series of documents and studies and so forth about how it's not safe for Australian citizens to live around the coast because of the potential for sudden or rapid ocean level rises. What they're defining that as is rather low, but their level of fear is quite solid and would suggest that they're afraid of something much larger than the 11 or 12 centimeters they're forecasting.
Wow. And, of course, we know, we have information that the government is moving everything, all of its underground bases and operations to, I think it's the 33rd degree above the latitude.
Yes, I know. They're really fond of these number combinations. 19.447 is a prime number within their system. 33 is all the permutations in terms of, sines and cosines of 19.47, such as 38 and 39 also have a place of honor, and they get really whipped up by all of this. But, of course, to a certain extent, there's a real reason for it, because within universe, these are actually very key understandings that are required, and they represent hyperdimensional reality or hyperdimensional metaphysical underpinning to reality. Just recently, there was these articles that came out that linked dark matter with the creation of the suns and all of this, and it's like, well, there was several $100,000s of dollars to produce a well-duh moment. Everybody should understand that that's the case, because the universe is basically made of tetrahedrons, which is the smallest possible shape that can exist, and meet all of the criteria that the universe requires. A really good discussion of it can be found in Synergetics in the first 4 chapter of Buckminster Fuller's work, and he goes on to describe how the universe has to be constructed. And lo and behold, years later, we discovered that indeed this is the case, and the hyperdimensional realities are in fact used by NASA and all the other science and even all of the shadow government, and they rely on it. And key components of those are embraced in these numeric codings of 33 and other significant numbers.
Yeah, and that's true. And another interesting thing is that they use a lot of esoteric numerology and astrology as well. They're quite adept at that, probably because some of the people who are at the top of the ladder are beyond the 33rd degree of Masonry or whatever, Rosicrucian, whatever.
No, if you're talking 33rd degree, to be accurate, you'd have to say in the U.S. that would be the Scottish Rite. Anything above the 3rd degree, you're not technically a Mason. You have to be invited to pass out of the standard Mason lodge from which they recruit into what's known as the Scottish Rite. And then you go on to the upper echelon, and theoretically there's 13 degrees beyond the 33rd degree in the Scottish Rite. But the transition between the 32nd and 33rd degree is reputed to be quite tough for many different reasons. But on the other hand, your statement is quite accurate, and these people take this numerology very seriously because they understand how the hyperdimensional nature of universe actually manifests, and that these numbers can be meaningful in that way. So, as an instance, the Hawaii is at 19.47 degrees of latitude because of the nature of the hyperdimensional structure of planet Earth. The red spots on the giant gas giants that are the perpetual storms are at 19.47 degrees latitude because of that same structure. Sunspots form in the sun at 19.47 degrees because of the internal hyperdimensional structure. Once you get all of this math down, then it becomes almost it does become, not almost, it is a form of very intense symbolism that can convey vast quantities of information in a relatively short period of time. So, for instance, the powers that be are real hyped on the number 11 and the number 9. Number 11, of course, is significant because it's the length of the sunspot cycle. It's also a key number in the formation of all different kinds of other numbers numerologically, and it is referenced as being one number past divinity, which was described as being the number 10. 9 is of special interest to him numerologically because it is the number before divinity, but it's also seen as the number of completion or ascension. And it goes on and on and on, but a lot of these things ultimately come back to the Platonic solids and the shapes that are actually manifest in universe. And basically, these shapes can be seen in the periodic table, but they exist in all these different orders that make no sense if you take UFOs and aliens out of the picture. If you put them back in, all of a sudden, yes, okay, this stuff does make sense.
Yeah.
So it's one of those kind of extractions. I don't have any personal evidence for it, but yes, I'm operating under the assumption that since 1956, there's been basically a functional form of anti-gravity or / free energy available at the shadow world level.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, that makes a lot of sense. I agree with that totally. Now, some people are talking about the possibility of one way that the powers that be, one of the little games that they could play on us